Hello, everyone. Welcome to Developmental Psychology, DEP 2004. I am Dr. Rivera. Hello, everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about John Piaget, and specifically, I'm going to focus on the sensorimotor stage. Remember that Piaget's theory begins from birth all the way to around age 11. And depending what age you go through a specific stage for that age group. During infancy, the stage that children go through is the sensory motor stage. Just to recap, Piaget is one of the first researchers to make clear that children think differently than adults. And specifically, the reason why they think differently is because they don't have all of the skills necessary. From Piaget's point of view, what we're waiting for is for the brain or the mind to mature. And until the brain or the mind reach that specific maturity, then that child cannot do the task of the next stage. Now, some students have a hard time keeping track of the ages. And so I have a little tip. If you remember the numbers 2, 7, 11, then you can remember all of the age groups for Piaget, because the first one is 0 to 2, the second one is 2 to 7, the next one is 7 to 11, and finally 11 and up. Now, in each stage, there are things that the child cannot do and things that they can do. And of course, there are going to be things that they're going to learn throughout that stage. We're going to focus on the sensory motor stage, but briefly, in the sensory motor stage, the main problem is that children cannot control their thoughts. If you ask a 1.5-year-old, what did you do yesterday? They might come up with something quite fanciful that they did. And sometimes people will say things like, oh, don't listen to him. He's just lying about that 1.5-year-old. But the problem is that 1.5-year-old isn't really lying. They're not trying to tell you something that's not true. You've asked them a question, and they don't have the skill to focus their mind to answer that question that you asked. And instead, just whatever pops into their head, that's what they end up telling you. And we'll talk a little bit about how there is a shift from essentially not being able to use your mind at all the way until having control of your mind and your thoughts. We'll talk about the pre-operational stage later on in future chapters. But during this stage, children can control their mind. You can ask them questions about what they did yesterday, and a lot of times they're going to be able to give you at least an answer that is close to reality. But if you ask them to do almost any logical mental task, they're not going to have an easy time doing that. And in fact, very simple things interfere in their ability to do logic. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that next chapters. During the concrete operational stage, we're at 7 to 11 here, the child now not only has control of their own mind, but they actually can do quite a lot of logical leaps. You can teach them a lot of concepts and they can follow along. But there are certain things that they're going to have a hard time with, specifically hypothetical problems and abstract problems. It's going to be really hard to ask that 8-year-old to solve for X. And then towards the middle of the semester, we'll probably talk a little bit more about the formal operational stage, where the child not only has control of their mind, not only is logical, but also they can think abstractly and they can think hypothetically. Now, early on, children and really young adults in their formal operational stage are often still dealing with a thing that interferes on a regular basis, and that's idealism. Now, I'm not saying idealism is something that interferes in life. It's good to have ideals, but early in people's formal operational state, idealism often blocks or interrupts the individual's ability to think logically. Middle schoolers might say things like, that's not fair, because their ideal version of the world is fair. And when something doesn't meet those ideals, they get rather upset. They can't understand why we can't just do things by their ideals, by their version of the world in their mind. This doesn't mean that they're dumb. If you sit them down and you get them calm and you ask them, why do you think you couldn't do that? Do you think that teacher or mom had a good reason? They could, especially if they're being honest, they could be able to understand that at a logical level. But oftentimes their ideals interfere with their logical thinking. But as I mentioned, what I'm going to focus on is a sensory motor stage. This is the first 2 years of life, so from birth to around 2 years old. And in that time, the child goes from not really having any control of their mind to being able to make plans and to accomplish those plans. Now, the way this happens is that there's a few substages that children go through during their sensory motor stage, and I am going to go over some of those. Now, I'm going to mention this again, but you'll notice that there are 6 substages, but the substages don't really match up with their titles. So, for example, tertiary circular reactions is actually stage 5, whereas secondary circular reactions is actually stage 3. And I'm going to give you a tip on how to keep those straight. But first, let's actually talk about what's happening. From birth to around 1 month old, the child is mostly just reflexes. Most of their behaviors are reflexes. They're not really trying to do anything on purpose. If you caress their foot or their back, they might move in a certain way. If you tickle the corner of their lips, they'll turn and try to suckle. All of these are simple reflexes that are stimulated by the environment. But even through this stage, the child is really intaking a lot of information. In this, throughout the entire sensory motor stage, the child is really interacting with the environment and they're learning a lot, but they don't have access to it, not on purpose. It could just come up into their head, but they can't force it to come up to their head just because they want to. Now, another thing that these children cannot do is that they can't make connections between modalities. I'm seeing something, I'm going to try to touch that thing that I'm seeing, right? They can't do that because vision is one modality and touch is a different one. And so children in this first stage, the simple reflexes, are really just reacting to the environment. Now, by the time the child is around 1 to 4 months old, they are going to start their primary circular reactions. And what starts to happen is that the child starts to coordinate between modalities. What might occur is that as they're moving around, they get a glimpse of their hand. And then they think to themselves, I'm going to try that again. I'm going to try to see if I can force that hand to come in front of my eye so that I can see it again. And they repeat the action over and over and over again. At first, it's just by chance, right? They just see their hand, they just see their foot by chance. But then they start to do it on purpose. In the primary circular reactions, the focus is always on the body. So in primary circular reactions, the child isn't looking at toys. They're not looking to try to act on the environment. They're trying to act on their body, and specifically by trying to control it so that they can see it, so that they can stick it in their mouth, right? Babies love to stick their feet in their mouth. And right, those are two modalities. Modality number 1, taste in the mouth. And then modality number 2, the movement and the touch of the foot. Now, during the secondary circular reactions, the same thing is happening, but now we've moved away from the body, and now the child is trying to act on their environment. They're still repeating the behaviors over and over and over again. But now it's not just on their bodies, it's on outside influences. Toys, for example. A baby might shake a rattle and the rattle makes a noise. And so they'll think, I wonder if I can make that happen again. And they'll try to shake the rattle again. Maybe they have a toy piano or xylophone and they hit one of the buttons and it makes a noise. And so now they're going to try to do it again, hit the button over and over and over again because they're trying to determine, is this behavior that I'm doing causing that thing to happen, that sound to happen? Now, something that a child in the secondary circular reactions cannot do is that they cannot combine schemas. They can't think. The toy is in the drawer. Can I open the drawer to get the toy, right? Those are three separate schemas. The toy, what the toy is, that's one schema. The drawer, what the drawer is, that's another schema. Opening and finding, these are separate schemas. And so at this level, those are too complex of ideas to try to also incorporate them all into a plan. But eventually, by the time the child hits coordination of secondary schemes, that's exactly what they're doing. Now they're trying to organize their thoughts so as to make plans. Now, the term scheme, I want to reiterate, is your mental framework, your schematics that you have developed over time. And some of them are quite simple, right? Like a pacifier goes in my mouth, to quite complex things like I can watch a movie on mom's iPad. And so what the child is going to start trying to do is to combine these in order to put them into action. They might see a toy on the corner of the bed and they see that the toy is on top of a sheet. And they can take those schemas and organize them in such a way so as to make a plan. If I pull the sheet, then the toy will get closer to me. And you might be noticing that the child's mental representations are getting quite complex and quite interesting. Even babies understand the way the physical world works. They are not going to explain physics to you. But if you throw a ball and the ball doesn't fall, they're going to be surprised. And you're going to see it in their face that they're surprised by that. And so, what that tells us is that, in fact, the baby's mind is actually quite complex. They have quite complex thoughts. And now they're applying those thoughts, those schemes, in order to set a plan in motion. Now, during the tertiary circular reactions, this is from about a year to a year and a half. Now, the infant has gotten pretty good at putting schemas together in order to make plans, but they always have to try it first. They can't do any of the mental process in their mind. And so they're going to try to pull the sheet. And if that doesn't work, then they might try reaching for it. This is the trial and error period. Maybe there is a stick or a toy outside of the crib, and they can reach for the toy, but they can't pull it inside the crib because of the bars. And so during this stage, the child can't turn the stick in his or her mind. They have to try it in the real world. And so what you'll see children doing during this stage is, trying to pull it one way, then switching it up, trying to pull it the other way, then switching it up, trying to pull it the other way, just trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. They cannot just think about it before they do it. They have to do it in the real world. And that's exactly what leads us then to the last stage, inventions of new means through mental combinations. And what that means, instead of trying to do it all in the real world, trying every possible direction to pull that toy inside of the crib. Now what they do is they think about it first. What can I do to get this toy through these bars? And they'll come up with an answer in their mind, and then they'll put that into action. It's during this stage, when kids start doing things that are a little dangerous or a little naughty. Because now this child can think, I know where there's chocolate milk in the refrigerator. And they can think in their mind, I've seen mom open the refrigerator. I think I can do that. I know which container has the chocolate milk. But of course, they are still babies. So when they try to go into the refrigerator and pull something out, there's a bunch of things that they're not thinking about. Like, is there something in front of that chocolate milk that if I pull the chocolate milk, it'll fall and make a mess? They're not going to think about that because that's still a little too complicated for them. But they can totally make a plan and put it into action. It was right around this stage when my nephew started playing with the iPad, and it was almost a sight to behold because within a few months, he was able to not only turn on the iPad and go to the right app, but he figured out which letters he needs to put into the search bar in order to get the videos that he wanted. And he wasn't reading, but he knew that when mom did it, she touched these letters. And so he would touch those letters. And it was just enough for YouTube to auto generate the rest of the answer. And then he found the video that he wanted to hear. And he started doing that very, very, very early. Usually, when we think about inventions of new means through mental combinations, we're talking about plans that the child makes in the real world. But more and more, because our world are online, what we see is that young kids have the ability of inventing new means in order to interact, not just with the real world, but also with that digital world. Now, I mentioned to you that the numbers and the titles of each stage, they don't exactly match up, right? The primary circular reactions is number 2 instead of 1. And secondary circular reactions is number 3 instead of 2, etc. And so the best way to think about it is like if the baby was going on a race. And so you're going to count down before they can go. And so the first one is ready. Ready? 1, 2, 2.5, 3, go. Right? So ready here is our first stage of simple reflexes. And as I mentioned, during this stage, the child is not thinking, can't control their mind. They are mostly simple reflexes. They are learning a lot, but they can't use it a lot because their mind is not mature enough. 1 is going to be primary circular reactions. Okay. And again, here, the baby repeats the actions, but specifically, they're focused on the body. 2 is going to be our secondary circular reactions. Again, the baby is repeating the actions, but now the focus is on external objects, toys, or just items that happen to be around. 2.5 is going to be coordination of secondary scheme modalities. You'll notice that I have a 2 and a 2.5 because I have a secondary circular reactions and a coordination of secondary schemes. And so it'll be a little bit easier to remember that way. So what's happening here? Here, the child is trying to coordinate schemas, mental frameworks in order to achieve a goal. If I pull the sheet, I can get the toy near me. If I grab that toy, I might be able to bring it inside of the crib. Number 3 here is going to be tertiary circular reactions. And now we're going to see if the first goal failed, then now the child can think of other ways to do things, but they can't really consider it inside their mind. they have to do it through trial and error. And so what we see is the child fails, but they keep on trying, but they try in the real world because they can't do the mental analysis inside their head. And then finally, the last stage is going to be our go. And this is invention of new means uh, through mental exploration. And now the child is thinking inside of their mind. They're putting plans into actions, analyzing them in their mind before they try it even once. So I would definitely make a note of that. Ready, 1, 2, 2.5, 3, go, because that's going to make it just a little bit easier to remember these stages in order. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions. And remember that the best way to contact me is directly through Canvas. I hope to hear from you soon.